Alright, so in this video we're going to set up all the squares of colors in tabular format on the window. We'll begin by defining a few constants here. I'll say num rows equals 30, and you can make the grid of colors as small or as big as you want. The program that I ran in the previous video was a 30 by 30 table of colors. Okay, and then we'll also define a square size of about 20 pixels. Okay? And then I am veering away from the small basic manual example a little bit. The way they place the colors, the way they place each box on the window, it's actually kind of slick what they do. I think I'd like to stick with what we saw in the 12 Days of Cupcakes program, and then just do like one row and then advance the cursor to the next line and so on. So in that case we'll just go ahead and set up our usual X and Y coordinates, and we'll start them 10 pixels in and 10 pixels down. So that'll be in the upper left edge, upper left margin of the window. Okay, now we are about to write a loop to create that grid of colors. And the thing is, this is not your typical loop. What we have to do is use what we call a nested loop. A nested loop, meaning a loop inside of a loop. Because if you think about it, the way we're going to construct this table, so to speak, is I'm going to plant this first square on the window. Okay? And then I'm going to move over, just like in 12 Days of Cupcakes, and plant the next square on the window. And then I'm going to advance the X cursor and plant the next square on the window, and so on. And I'm doing that 30 times this way. Okay? So that's repetition, right? 30 times planting a square, planting the next one, planting the next one, it's very repetitive. 30 times that's happening. Okay? But we're doing that 30 times thing in this direction. We're doing that 30 times downward. So this is really repetition repeated, because after I reach the 30th square and I draw it on the window, then I'm going to advance the Y cursor and do it all over again. And we're going to have to do it all over again 30 times. So we get repetition repeated, and so to accomplish that we use what is called a nested loop, or a loop inside the loop. So that's what we'll code now. Alright, so I will just begin by, this will be the outer loop. So if you can imagine a sandwich inside of a sandwich, and then what I'm typing now will be the outer sandwich, the one that you would the one that you would be holding if you were going to eat the nested sandwich, the one that you have your hands on. Okay, so we have for R, I'm using that because it helps, rather we could use I or X or some of our previous loop counters, previous names that we use for loop counters, but really when you're looping through a two-dimensional array, it's very typical to see loop counters like R and C for row and column. So we'll say for R equals 1 to num rows, which is 30, so this outer loop will go 30 times, and I'm going to end that before I go into the next one. Okay, so here's our outer sandwich, and then inside we have the inner loop, so this will be for C equals 1 to num columns. Okay? Now, most of the action takes place in the inner loop, right? And what's happening here, this inner loop is the one that's responsible for laying down a row. And really this square, this whole grid is going to be established row by row. So the inner loop is going to first lay down that first square, and then move on to the next position and lay down the second square, and the third and the fourth, and so on up till 30 squares. So we'll write the code to create those squares. So first thing we'll do, before we add the shape to, we're adding rectangular shapes to an array. All right, what we'll call the boxes array, just like you saw on the document. But before we draw the box and add it to the array, we will get a random brush color from the graphics window. So we get the random color effect. Okay, so I'll set the brush color of the graphics window to a random color by using the getRandomColor method of the graphics window. Okay, now we're ready to create a rectangle, a square, and put it into the boxes array. So remember what I said, it's always RC, row column. So here's how we reference the array element. So first time through R is 1, first time through the inner loop column is 1, so I would be putting my first square into this position 1, 1, which is this guy, okay? And then, oops, then this loop will run 30 times, the inner loop runs 30 times, and then the outer loop is repeated. So it'll run 30 times. So during the course of this loop running 30 times, we'll have 1, 2, row 1, column 2, and then row 1, column 3, row 1, column 4, row 1, column 5, and so on. So there we go. All right. Oops. So we have we'll just create shapes. These are not going to be interactive and clickable images or anything like that. So we'll just use the shapes add rectangle method. And let's see, we're asked to provide a width and a height. We already established that the square size would be 20 pixels, so that'll be 20 pixels by 20 pixels. So we'll just provide square size as in 20 for the width, and then square size for the height. Okay, and then we have to move the square into place. Now, I'm doing something different than you'll see in that example in the manual. We'll just go ahead and use the XY coordinates. So we're moving the guy that we just created, which is this guy, okay, R and C indexes, and we'll move him to the XY position, okay. You'll see in my sample program, I did delay the action a little bit just to kind of slow it down if you want almost like a screensaver effect or more of a kind of a mesmerizing effect, and you can slow down the program. Otherwise, the grid would be created rather quickly. Okay, so, all right. Oh, and, whoops, almost forgot. What would this do? This would create a bunch of squares. Well, let me run it. It's working. I have my 900 squares, but they're all stacked on top of one another. So I didn't advance the X cursor at all, and of course we'll have to advance the Y cursor too to move on to the next row. So after I move the shape, and it doesn't matter, I could do this after the program delay as well. Okay, we'll say X equals X plus the square size. So X starts at 10, so first time through the loop, X equals 10 plus 20, so X will be in the 30 position, okay? Next time through the loop, X equals 30 plus 20, X moves to the 50 position. So we're moving X across the row as this loop runs. Okay, so what this will do is give us a row, a complete row of squares, and then once we get to the end of the row, we want to advance to the next line, so to speak, and so we also have to increment Y. And notice, look, I'm no longer in the inner loop. The inner loop will lay out the row, and then we're done with it, but then we have to advance the cursor. I'm in the outer loop now, so Y equals Y plus the square size, just like we incremented X. And don't forget, we have to reset X back to 10, so it moves back to the beginning. And there's our grid of random colors. In the next video, we'll deconstruct this grid and make the boxes float away one by one.